that the Queen wanted this and believed in this, and thank you very, very much indeed for joining us, and thank you for the work that you do to preserve our history and our heritage. And talking of history, what a day today has been, hasn't it? Just truly remarkable to see the King walking in there into Parliament to address both houses, then to stand vigil at St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh tonight. We are witnessing an extraordinary week, a week where history suddenly becomes real, where, as one of our messengers said earlier on, where suddenly we see what the constitutional monarchy actually is in action. It's real. It gives us a deeper and better understanding, actually, of who we are, what this country is, and what's unique about it. Now, coming up after me is Dan Wootton. Dan, what have you got on the show tonight?
Nigel, good evening. We are live from Buckingham Palace, and I have to say that moment that we shared with you earlier as Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward gathered around the coffin was really spine-tingling, actually, and I loved the fact that you just allowed us that minute to have that moment, because it was really a beautiful moment. I'm going to be live, of course, over the next 2 hours. And we've got a big range of guests looking forward to tomorrow and also covering what have been these remarkable events today. Tom Bower will be with me live at Buckingham Palace to look into exactly what's going on with Harry, Meghan, William and Kate, and of course Prince Andrew, who was heckled. There was a moment, Nigel, where he was heckled on that procession today. We're also going to cross to the US, where we're joined by Samantha and Thomas Markle Jr., who want to pay their own tribute to Queen Elizabeth II on behalf of their father. And we're going to bring you the newspaper front pages the moment they drop. We'll have all of the breaking news and all of our regulars and superstar panel too. So we'll have a very big show live from Buckingham Palace between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. So please do stay with us tonight. Thank you, Nigel.
Yep, stay with Dan. He's got a very busy couple of hours. He was there at Buckingham Palace, broadcasting live. I'm back with you tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Of course, the body will be on its way to London tomorrow night. Now, we'll get the news.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. I'm Dan Wootton, live from Buckingham Palace, which from tomorrow will become the centre of the nation's mourning for the late Queen Elizabeth II. In the last hour, a grief-stricken King Charles stood vigil over his mother's coffin as it lies in state at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. And in an official statement released today, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex issued his profound tribute with the words, "Granny, I am forever grateful to you." Coming up in my digest, I'll argue that it's now critical for Harry to rally around his father, the new king. Meanwhile, the eyes of the world were once again on Scotland. The late Queen's coffin carried from the palace of Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving. As Her Majesty rests in her beloved Scotland tonight for the final time, I'll speak to GB News star Neil Oliver about the political significance of the last few days and why optimism for the Union has had a major lift. Don't miss that at 9:45. As well-known royalist Thomas Markle continues to recover from his stroke, his children, Samantha and Thomas Jr., have asked for the opportunity to share the family's grief. So the Markle family are going to pay tribute to the Queen live at 10:20. Plus, why is America's left-wing media disrespecting our monarchy at a time of national mourning? DailyMail.com star columnist Meghan McCain makes clear that those woke attacks are not the view of the patriotic American majority. She's live with me at 10:45. There'll also be expert analysis from our royal masterminds, Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier, and I'm reunited with an esteemed panel of political commentators, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the former MEP and campaigner Belinda de Lucy. But first, I'm joined live at Buckingham Palace by the acclaimed royal biographer Tom Bower. Tom, what incredible scenes we've seen over the past 2 hours. What did you make of that moment when the Queen was surrounded by her children in St Giles Cathedral?
Well, I think the whole day, and that particularly, was amazingly touching. I mean, I think King Charles, has actually acquitted himself brilliantly today. I mean, he has really travelled to 7 different locations, great speeches, deep interest in all the people he was meeting, clearly campaigning to be accepted as the King in Scotland, a critical place for him to succeed, but also in Parliament. I mean, he really captured the mood and captured I think, the obedience and the affection of politicians, which isn't easy.
Today's events have been good for the Union, haven't they, Tom?
They've been very good for the Union, they've been very good for Britain, they've been very good for the Constitution, they've been good for all the people of Britain who really believe in the country. And I think what's been really remarkable is that people of such diverse backgrounds are all pledging their loyalty to Britain. And there's no sign of any dissent at all. And that I find really encouraging. Not a murmur, really.
And I mean, those crowds in Scotland, lots of folks said, look, you're going to see the crowds in London, but perhaps we're going to have a more muted reaction in Scotland. They could not have been more wrong. The streets of Edinburgh, they were about 20 deep.
Eat your heart out, Nicola Sturgeon.
Yes.
I mean, she must have been really upset about that and having to sing God Save the King and all the other things which were stuck in her throat, no doubt.
Do you think the Queen would have had a wry smile, Tom?
I think the Queen had the last laugh on that.
Yeah,
So I
indeed.
think it's been a triumph in Scotland. I hope tomorrow in Ireland as well. Charles is, let's face it, an acknowledged campaigner. He's been for 50 years meeting and greeting, and he is genuinely very interested in people. My only caveat is I think he's a bit too interested. He seemed to be engaging in conversations which one always fears he might then say something which gets reported and is out of context. But today has been his day, the royal family's day, and Britain's day, because it is altogether a great accolade to our country that this wonderful woman, we all knew that we had a terrible moment when she went, that we somehow were getting over it because it's brilliantly organised, the choreography, the pageantry, everything is so perfect. A lot of people have put a lot of work in and they should be congratulated.
Tom Bower, the acclaimed royal biographer, live with me at Buckingham Palace. He is here with me all evening, and of course we are here until 11 p.m. with all the latest coverage as the King and country continues to mourn our late Queen Elizabeth II. But to round up what has been another emotional and incredible day, the news with Tamsin Roberts.
Dan, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. King Charles and his siblings have held a vigil at the Queen's coffin at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. The King was joined by the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex at the 4 sides of the coffin. Her Majesty will lie in rest at St Giles Cathedral for the next 24 hours before being flown to London ahead of the monarch lying in state at Westminster Hall. Earlier, the King visited the Scottish Parliament, where he and the Queen Consort received a motion of condolence. After 2 minutes' silence, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon reflected on the Queen's life and her close bond with Scotland. The King responded by promising to follow his mother's example.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
King Charles also led a procession today following his mother's coffin along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. Joined by his siblings, they walked from Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, where a remembrance service has been held. During the service, Elder of the Church of Scotland, Morag Mill, thanked God for the Queen's long life.
With all our hearts, we thank you for the long life, the shining example, the steadfast commitment to duty, the strong faith, and the good humour of our wise and great Queen.
This morning in London, King Charles attended Westminster Hall, where both Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion.
In reply, the King said he was deeply grateful for their addresses and described Parliament as a living and breathing instrument of democracy. This is GB News. Back now to Dan Wootton at Buckingham Palace.
After lying at Holyrood House last night before her final journey to London, where at least 1 million people are expected to line the streets of the capital for her state funeral, today the Queen belonged once more to the people of Scotland. The spine-tingling procession to St Giles Cathedral, where the Queen's 4 children marched behind her coffin, provided the emotional crescendo on another historic day of pomp and pageantry amidst very real grief.
As Shakespeare says of the earlier Queen Elizabeth, she was a pattern to all princes living.
What a day it has been. But there was controversy too. Prince Andrew was heckled by a protester who ended up being silenced by an outraged member of the public.
Beginning of that long procession.
Disgusting! Wait, I've done nothing wrong.
Meanwhile, another unsavoury family row is developing behind the scenes over the family's wayward non-working royals, Andrew and Prince Harry, just like it did in the days before Prince Philip's funeral. Andrew had to face the heckler today without being dressed in military uniform like his siblings, King Charles, Prince Edward and Princess Anne. That's because a decision has been made for only working members of the royal family to be able to wear their military garb for the ceremonial events honouring the Queen. However, as a special mark of respect, it's been reported that Andrew, a Falklands War veteran of course, will be able to wear his uniform. By contrast, Harry and Meghan's odd little PR mouthpiece, Omid Scobie, tweeted that, "I understand that unlike Prince Andrew at final vigil, Prince Harry will not be allowed to wear uniform at any ceremonial events." No doubt a huge blow for the Duke of Sussex, who served for 10 years and this morning spoke of the Queen being his commander-in-chief. So it's abundantly clear that despite Saturday's historic walkabout between the Prince and Princess of Wales and the Sussexes, significant tensions still remain between Harry and Meghan and the rest of their family. Tellingly, in Harry's statement paying tribute to the late Queen today, he said, "We now honour my father in his new role as King Charles III." By contrast, on Saturday, William pledged, "I will honour her memory by supporting my father the King in every way I can." The rest of Harry's statement, I really do think it's worth sharing with you in full. It reads, "In celebrating the life of my grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen, and in mourning her loss, we are all reminded of the guiding compass she was to so many in her commitment to service and duty. She was globally admired and respected. Her unwavering grace and dignity remained true throughout her life and now her everlasting legacy. Let us echo the words she spoke after the passing of her husband, Prince Philip, words which can bring comfort to all of us now. Life, of course, consists of final partings as well as first meetings. Granny, while this final parting brings us great sadness, I am forever grateful for all of our first meetings, from my earliest childhood memories with you, to meeting you for the first time as my Commander-in-Chief, to the first moment you met my darling wife and hugged your beloved grandchildren. I cherish these times shared with you and the many other moments in between. You are already sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over. Thank you for your commitment to service. Thank you for your sound advice. Thank you for your infectious smile. We too smile, knowing that you and Grandpa are reunited now and both together in peace." Now, The Sun reported today that Harry and William could put their significant differences aside once more to walk side by side behind the Queen's coffin. During Prince Philip's funeral last year, they had to be separated by their cousin Peter Phillips. That would be one important sign that Harry could put his family and country ahead of toxic personal rows, which saw him reportedly dinner separately from Charles and William at Balmoral on the night the Queen died. But how much would it have meant to King Charles if Harry had today publicly pledged to support his reign? To respond now, I'm joined by my superstar panel, the Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda de Lucy. It's great to speak to you all. Carol Malone, look, it was a lovely statement from Prince Harry, but it's disappointing, isn't it, that he didn't pledge to support King Charles in the same way that Prince William did?
And I'm wondering why Prince Harry is making any statement. I can see why William would be making a statement because he's heir to the throne now. But I'm not sure why Harry felt the need to. And I have to say, and it's not really the time to be critical, but you know, I felt a certain resentment listening to that speech, and he was talking about. I have no doubt that he loved his grandmother, but he talked about, you know, supporting her and her being his compass. You know, that's not what we've seen in the past 2 years. You know, his actions and his words during the past 2 years do not reflect that speech. And I don't know why he made that statement, Dan. I was kind of reading stuff on social media today, and a lot of people think it's fabulous and it's wonderful. And as I say, I have no doubt that he adored his grandmother, but I do think it's hypocrisy to say, you know, that you know, he adored her and respected her and loved her, and yet he caused her so much pain in the last 2 years of her life. It would have been fantastic for the Queen, I think, if before her death she had seen William and Harry reconcile, even if, you know, for whatever reason, but she didn't, and Harry and Meghan were determined that that wouldn't happen. And I am sure there's lots of anger and frustration that exists still between the two men, but I'm almost as certain that that walkabout will have changed nothing, and it can't change anything. But I felt it's not anger, because I can't feel anger at the moment because our Queen is dead, but I do feel a bit resentful that he is saying these things, and yet his actions of the past 2 years have not been anything to do with what he said today. He disrespected his grandmother hugely by some of the things that he has done in the past 2 years.
Belinda de Lucy, do you agree?
Well, I certainly agree with Carol that, I mean, I'm not full of any sort of hate or anything towards Harry and Meghan at this time whatsoever. However, I do feel like Harry's mentioning that Queen Elizabeth is his moral compass did not sit well with me whatsoever. His constant offloading in attacks on the royal family are deeply unfair, because remember, the royal family cannot defend themselves. They can't retaliate to any of the accusations from Harry and Meghan, whether they're true or false. They have no way of getting back or defending themselves, and Harry knows that, and still he goes into the ring with his boxing gloves while the royal family are there with their hands tied behind their back, and I feel there's something deeply dishonourable about that. And I think his speech today was quite hypocritical, and it was like swallowing a bitter pill listening to it. But I don't feel any hate or anger today towards them whatsoever.
Sam Dowler, you feel like Prince Harry did show enough support to his father, King Charles?
I think ultimately there is no doubt, of course, that Harry has caused the Queen a certain amount of anguish in the last couple of years. But I think it would be disingenuous of him to say in a statement, you know, like gush about his father, gush about King Charles, because obviously, you know, stuff has happened in the past, and there's this book coming out in the future, and I think that he will take a beat, perhaps, and re-look at what's going on with his own book. I mean, for starters, it would have to be re-edited anyway to speak about Prince Charles as King Charles. But maybe he would temper some of the things that he has to say, some of the gripes he has, because at the end of the day, like, he's coming. If he's coming for his father, like, his father is now the king. It's almost treasonous to release a book slagging off the King of England. I mean, I don't think it would be as bad. I think it would.
Even you're struggling to defend him now.
Do you truly believe he will temper this book?
Yeah, I do. I
don't believe it from
I do.
Nanos.
I think perhaps he maybe didn't think that the gushing, the amount of love everybody is showing now for King Charles, which we must and we should, because it will maintain our monarchy, which is our national identity. I think he would come across as
Carol,
very,
it's
very
not
foolish.
even just about tempering what he says, Carol.
Stop
he
the
has
book.
to pulp
Don't
this
do
book.
the book
The book
at all.
has to be withdrawn.
Completely withdrawn, you know. But
it's not going to happen, though.
But the thing is, it won't be withdrawn because, you know, there's a lot of money riding on this, and he's never, you know, that's why he's never going to come back into the royal fold, because if he does, he has to keep stum, and neither he nor Meghan are going to allow that to happen. You know, if he really respected his grandmother, this book would be cancelled instantly. He talks about, you know.
We don't know what's in it, though, do we?
He talks about respect for her, while, you know, how much he respected her when she was alive. Well, no, he didn't respect her when she was alive. You know, there was a point a year ago when he called her a bad mother on the Oprah Winfrey Show. How many times has he seen this beloved grandmother in the past 2 years? He was invited to go to Balmoral in August to see her. She invited him. Him and Meghan didn't go, and yet they can come to London for a charity event in September. Maybe had he gone in August, that would have given some comfort to the Queen. How well does she know her 2 grandchildren? She doesn't. She's barely seen them. To me, that's cruel. To me, that's the ultimate cruelty, to deny a grandmother access to her grandchildren, and yet she has seen those kids twice in person, maybe 3 times. Not enough. That doesn't show respect.
No, I agree with that, but I have to say that I think that there's no chance of the book not coming out now. I mean, they probably already spent the money, but I think that there might be re-edits, there might be maybe a change of tone, perhaps.
No, there won't.
Yeah, it will not be. It won't be a slating piece of the King of England. It won't be. Otherwise, he will never be allowed back in the country.
Sam, as long as victimhood is.
Final word to you, Belinda.
As long as victimhood is their currency, This is how they make their money. They have to stay relevant by selling stories on how much they're victims, because in America, the victimhood currency is huge. You can be billionaires off victimhood currency. And unfortunately, it doesn't bode well that while Prince Philip was in hospital, they still let the Oprah Winfrey interview go ahead. That was massively insulting to the Queen. I think Harry, unfortunately, has displayed behaviour that is opposite to how the Queen would act. So I'm afraid Harry's not in my good books at the moment.
No, indeed. Very good point. And look, while I do absolutely understand that Prince Harry is grieving at the moment, he adored his grandmother, I will also point out that it was in the days before her death that couple, the Sussexes, were still briefing that even though they were on a visit to the UK, they didn't want to see any member of the royal family, not even the Queen. That was run literally days before her death. So obviously, I thought it was a beautiful statement today, but I don't think we can forget all of that. Thank you so much. My panel, Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda DeLucy. They will be with me all night as we continue our coverage of the remarkable life of Her late Majesty the Queen. And breaking tonight, King Charles III has stood vigil around Her late Majesty the Queen's coffin as it lies in state at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. He was joined by his three siblings, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward. The sombre occasion is the third vigil for the princes, which began following King George VIII's death in 1936 and was repeated for the Queen Mother in 2002. Princess Anne is the first female royal to take part in the historic ceremony. The grief-stricken king and his siblings were solemn and mournful as they paid their respects to their late mother. Joining me now to reflect on what has been an incredibly moving couple of hours, our esteemed royal writers, Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier. Lady C, wow, what a moment we've seen tonight. What did you make of it?
Well, I thought it was very moving, the vigil, you know, and to have Princess Anne there as well. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And it's in the finest tradition, started, ironically enough, by King Edward VIII with his brothers to honour his father, George V. And I thought it was beautiful. I also thought, may I say, that the service today at St. Giles Cathedral and the whole of the proceedings were absolutely magnificent.
Phil Dampier, do you agree? Phil Dampier, do you agree?
Splash every sort of couple of hours, isn't there? And it was absolutely remarkable. What amazed me was the fact that as the royals stood around the coffin, members of the public were just walking past a few feet away. I didn't think that was going to happen. I assumed that they wouldn't be let in while it was going on. And to see them filing past just a few feet was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in 36 years of royal reporting. But the other thing that struck me today, to be honest, was the extraordinary stamina that Prince Charles is displaying. He must be absolutely exhausted. This is a guy who turns 74 in a couple of months' time. And yet he was at Westminster Hall this morning addressing Parliament, flew up to Scotland, met people at Holyrood, walked behind the coffin on the way down to St Giles, went back for another reception, met the First Minister, and then had the vigil. And it's absolutely remarkable the way that his schedule is going and the way he's doing it. So you've got to take your hat off to him. He's obviously decided to really go for it. He seems to want to meet as many people as possible, and I think it's working for him.
Lady C, it has been a pitch-perfect start to his reign, hasn't it? I mean, it was really interesting today, as Phil says, seeing how many folk he wanted to talk to in Scotland, how many ordinary people he had a real desire to get up close and personal, which is exactly what we saw outside the gates of Buckingham Palace too.
Yes, but sorry, Charles has always connected with all sorts of people, and he's always been a complete workaholic. He gets up early in the morning, he has breakfast, he works through, he never has lunch, he meets with Queen Camilla for tea if they're together, he goes back to work, he has dinner at 8:30 to 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock he leaves dinner wherever he is, and goes and works until 12 or 1 o'clock, sometimes even 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, he has this constitution of an ox, but so did both his parents. I mean, to that extent, he's been very lucky. He's inherited very good genes from both his parents, both of whom were extremely hardworking as well. And it has to be said, both of whom were also extremely involved on a daily basis with as many people, ordinary people, as well as people of note, as they could possibly be.
Phil Dampier, of course, there was that uncomfortable moment during the procession where there was a heckler who interrupted proceedings. Specifically, he was, of course, referring to Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew also today wasn't able to wear military uniform. You're one of the journalists who knows Prince Andrew best. You've covered him for many years. How difficult would today have been for the disgraced Duke of York?
I think it would have been difficult, but he was doing his duty as a family member, you know, and he was with his siblings and very much part of the family. I'm sure that's how it's going to be in the next few days and indeed at the funeral. The fact that he won't be able to wear his military uniform except possibly at the vigil won't come as a great surprise to him. He's no longer a working royal. They've made that fairly clear that there's no way back for him at the moment, certainly in the immediate future. I don't know if there is long term or not, but certainly not in the immediate future. And so I don't think any of it comes as a surprise to him, but nobody can begrudge him as a son of the Queen from being at the heart and centre of all these events. But the fact that there was this heckler just goes to demonstrate the problems that his reputation now has, and he might get this sort of abuse quite often in public, and it just really sort of highlights. I mean, nobody really likes people heckling like that, but it does highlight the problem.
Lady C, did you think it was fair that Prince Andrew wasn't allowed to wear his military uniform?
Well, I vision that if he's not a working royal, he can't, except possibly for the vigil. I don't think there's any need to change that. I personally think that Prince Andrew has been gloriously stitched up. I know people who know Prince Andrew extremely well, and I can tell you something, his tastes, as I have said before, don't run in the direction. And I think that the whole situation is most regrettable, and I think that he has been subjected to a grave injustice. And of course, their emotions run very high, because, the public has been fed a whole load of tosh about the situation, most of which does not stand up to scrutiny. Let us remember, his accuser at the moment is being sued in a New York court by one of her victims for having been a procuress who told her to lie about her age and say she was over the age of consent. All of this.
Into all of that tonight, but the point that you're making is that Prince Andrew should actually be able to play a full role, and he should be able to wear his military uniform, presumably because you believe he was a veteran and he hasn't been found guilty of anything. I presume that's what you're saying.
That is what I'm charged with no crime, found guilty of no crime. And, he has undoubtedly been a war hero. There's no two ways about it. And, he has been pilloried for something, but let's draw a veil over it. All I would say is I hope that people can restrain themselves, if not for him, for the Queen and King Charles III. Let's put it that way.
Phil Dampier, this is obviously a fascinating discussion, isn't it? Because I'm a free speech fundamentalist. I absolutely believe that if people want to make political points, they can do so. But this is a woman's funeral. It is not the time nor the place.
No, it's not the time and place. I mean, we don't live in North Korea, do we? We don't live in Russia. You know, we do believe in free speech. But having said all that, I do find it staggering that during Mrs. Thatcher's funeral, for example, there were people protesting and leaping up and down. I just think it's disrespectful. If you've got nothing nice to say on a day of a funeral, don't say anything. I just don't understand it. But there was another protester who was arrested today in London, I think, or cast off and told that he was causing a breach of the peace because he was against the monarchy. Well, you know, there's a time and a place to express your opinions, and maybe this isn't the right time. So, you know, let's just have a bit of old-fashioned decency and old-fashioned manners on an occasion like this. There's plenty of time for people to make their point on other occasions.
Lady C, what are we expecting tomorrow? What are we expecting tomorrow, Lady C?
Oh, sorry. Well, I'm afraid you've thrown me. So ask me something else.
Phil, what do you think we should look forward to tomorrow, Phil?
The body's going to return to London. Princess Anne and her husband are going to accompany it, flying out from Edinburgh down to RAF Northolt. In the morning, still people will be filing past. And then in the evening, the body's taken to Buckingham Palace, where she will spend one more night in Buckingham Palace, that place that she spent so much time, and indeed where she gave birth to her 3 sons. Actually, Princess Anne was born in Clarence House around the corner, but gave birth to her 3 sons there. So that will be a very poignant moment when she leaves Buckingham Palace for the last time the day after. But that's where she'll be tomorrow night. No members of the public will see her there, but the family will be able to be with her at Buckingham Palace.
And Lady C, the expectation that some 1 million folk might try and catch a glimpse of the Queen's coffin. It's going to be extraordinary, isn't it, here?
Well, I think it is, and I think she deserves it. She gave us 70 years of her life. She never missed a beat in the 70 years. She was an absolute example of what selfless devotion truly is, as well as decency, moderation, and all the civilizing virtues. I think she deserves it, and I think that there will be more people looking, really paying their respects to her, because that's really what it's all about. You know, they're not viewing the casket, they're actually paying their respects to her. And I understand that people are going to be very happy to stand up for hours just for the opportunity to walk past the catafalque and pay their respects to her for the few minutes that they do. And I think it's as it ought to be. Remember, she gave us 70 years. If a few of us want to give her a few minutes or a few hours, it's a very good bargain, wouldn't you say, to put it like that?
No, I couldn't agree more. It's going to be extraordinary in London for the next few days. Of course, people around the country and around the world gathering here. Thank you so much to our royal correspondents, Phil Dampier and Lady Colin Campbell. We will speak to you both tomorrow. It's now just a week until the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, and thoughts are beginning to turn to what role, if any, will be played by the royal outcast Prince Andrew and Prince Harry. It's been decided by Buckingham Palace, as I mentioned, that due to their status as non-working royals, neither Andrew or Harry will wear military uniform to the late Queen's funeral. However, Andrew has been permitted to wear his Royal Navy dress for the final vigil at Westminster Hall. Meanwhile, there is concern over future ceremonial events after today's procession to St Giles Cathedral was marred by a protester targeting the Duke of York. Look.
Beginning of that long procession.
Disgusting! Wait, I've done nothing wrong.
So, Tom, that was an ugly incident, of course, with the heckler and Prince Andrew. whatever you think of Prince Andrew, this is a man who is grieving his mother. He is humiliated because there he is in his suit when his brothers and sisters are in their military uniform, and of course he proudly served in the Falklands War. But how difficult is this going to be for the royal family to manage, given there are other public events coming?
Well, it's unfortunate, and it's not the only great problem they're facing. Obviously, Harry and Meghan is another.
Which we will come to in a moment.
But of course, it is a huge embarrassment, and it is his last hurrah. I thought that when he stood outside Balmoral that first day after he started waving at the crowd, that was totally inappropriate. He still doesn't realise how shamed he is.
He thinks, doesn't he? Because we saw this after the death of Prince Philip too. He believes these are moments to rehabilitate his image with the public.
Exactly, and he's wrong. And clearly he hasn't got the message, but he's clearly not very intelligent, and that's rather a shame. But someone needs to tell him straight away now. He's just got to take a back seat.
So, Harry and Meghan, you mentioned them, of course. There seems to already be a row brewing today over whether Prince Harry should be allowed to wear his military garb, if Prince Andrew is allowed for the vigil. At this point, the royal family is saying no. This could get ugly, couldn't it?
I think it will get very ugly, and I think that in the end it's down to whether Harry and Meghan are prepared to apologise to Kate and William. My suspicion is, I'm convinced they won't apologise. Even worse, I'm told tonight that Harry is insisting that his book is published in November.
You're kidding.
Absolutely, it's absolutely astonishing. He's insisting. Apparently the publishers are not too certain, but he says that if they don't publish, he will breach a contract. That's what I'm told. And it's extraordinary because I think that's pretty, on the other hand, it fits the bill because Harry and Meghan's finances depend entirely on the book and on Netflix. And also, I think they're convinced they're in the right and they want to get their own back. And I think that part of the problem getting them to come out on that walk yesterday was very much because they can't decide whether they should appear or not. After all, they didn't plan to be here for a funeral. They thought they were coming for just a visit to promote themselves. They've been caught up in it.
And they didn't intend to see any.
And they didn't. And we've got to remember that Meghan refused to go to Balmoral ever since she was invited by the Queen in 2018. Refused to go up to see her while she was alive, but was desperate to go up there the day of the death. I mean, that is a disgrace of it all.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to get my head around this because we've been talking a lot about this book, because my view, Tom, is that if Prince Harry has any sense of dignity or respect for his father and his grandfather's memory, he has to pulp this book. This book has to be cancelled. It can't be released. But you're saying not only does he want to press ahead with it, he wants to release it this year.
Absolutely, because that's when he's going to make the most money. I mean, everything in my view is based on finance, but I don't think there's any respect. I mean, that's the problem. He doesn't respect it. He's shown that. And Meghan even worse. I mean, I think her interview in The Cut 2 weeks ago, that American magazine, where she says she's got a lot more to say and she hasn't got any sentiment of forgiving. And Harry has lost his father. All those things just bubbling up, stirring and stirring and stirring for attention, for her own financial benefit, to make herself important. I think they're going to use this week, and it's going to get very ugly if someone doesn't take strict control over it very quickly.
And I guess, Tom, that was why William invited them for the walkabout outside Windsor Castle, because it's not that he has forgiven Harry. I mean, he hasn't. The row is deep.
The book is a time bomb. And what William is trying to do, as is the King, with that speech at the end where he says we love Harry and Meghan, is to defuse the time bomb. But the time bomb is ticking, and I think Harry feels very committed to it, as does Meghan. And they now see it as their vehicle. This is their way to assert themselves. They have no sense anymore of what it's like to be part of the family in Britain. And that is the great tragedy. However hard King Charles and William try, I think they're going to find it very, very difficult. I was surprised by the march, the appearance outside Windsor.
So was I.
I thought it was very, very clever by William to try and do it. But, just that walk doesn't mean that the past can be forgotten. And
their PR people continue to brief even during this period of national period of mourning, because there's their odd little mouthpiece, that bloke Omid Scobie, tweeting today on behalf of Prince Harry over the military uniform. So even this period of mourning hasn't stopped the briefing and the counter briefing.
And that's they're sitting in Frogmore, plotting and fuming and getting amazingly angry. And I thought what was really relevant was that Harry wasn't on the plane up to Balmoral, didn't have dinner with the other members of the family, probably didn't even have breakfast and had to fly back commercial. What is interesting about that flight back was, I didn't see any protection officers, did you?
No.
I didn't see any worry about privacy. I mean, the whole phoniness, why we had to leave Megxit because of privacy and protection, all the rest of it, is all boo-ha.
So this is about money?
This is about money, about themselves, two very, very insignificant people who are out, in my view, to destroy the royal family for their own fame. And I think King Charles and William have a huge problem this week to try and contain it, and thereafter as well.
They do, but of course the start has been very positive for King Charles.
It's been terrific.
The thing is, Tom, you can't rewrite history. And so no matter what they now try and say, no matter how Harry and Meghan try and frame this, here are the facts. When Prince Philip was on his deathbed, they were throwing grenades to the royal family via an Oprah Winfrey interview. When the Queen was on her deathbeds, they were throwing grenades via an interview in The Cut and via their favoured journalists. History can never change that.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm convinced that this story out tonight that Harry wants his book out is probably true. That they don't see it, they don't see what's happening in London today as really part of their lives. I thought it was rather odd that Harry would issue his statement so late. Why did it come late? Clearly he was prompted that by some publicist it would be good to say something about his grandmother.
But it was interesting, actually. I was told that it was because they didn't want to release the statement on the anniversary of 9/11, which was yesterday. Because they are an American-operated machine now, aren't they? That's the reality. So maybe that did make some sense. Did you see the clip, Tom? We can't actually play it, but did you see the clip I've posted on my Twitter page where Meghan forgot that she was being filmed at the walk around outside Windsor Castle and actually snapped quite rudely at one of the royal courtiers? And I thought, given a lot of what you've written and what I've written over the years, that was one of those moments that had previously happened behind the scenes, emerging in public.
You saw the real, absolutely. And what was rather interesting was the body language. She hung back when the four of them were standing together for a bit of the time. And Harry was clearly very, very nervous. It'll be interesting to see how they work now. My concern is only that the royal family survives, prospers, and is not damaged by them. Because Britain, as we're seeing this week, is such an enhanced country because of the royal family, and as is New Zealand and Australia and the whole world. They represent just sheer service and good value and real values. And one way or another, the Sussexes have to be neutralised before they can detonate their bomb.
Well, they have already caused damage, Tom, to the Caribbean. We saw that during Prince William's tour.
And
so the damage is real. This is not just a media story.
He tried his hardest with the representatives of the realms yesterday, I think it was at Lancaster House or Buckingham Palace, to try and repair the damage. I think he'll find it very difficult. I mean, the problem is that he hasn't worked hard enough on the Commonwealth in the past, but now, because of what Meghan and the racism, she would have to apologise profusely and admit. But what's interesting is that Archie and Lilibet have not yet been in the Gazette appointed Prince and Princess. So I think that needs to happen to prove her wrong. I mean, she said so many things which are untrue in the Oprah Winfrey interview, the racism thing in particular.
But surely they're complete hypocrites if they accept an HRH title for their two children.
What's wrong with being a hypocrite from their point of view? That's exactly what they are all the time. I mean, hypocrisy for them is their paycheck.
Now, Prince Charles, now King Charles, has obviously had a perfect start to his reign. It couldn't have gone better from a PR point of view. I have been critical of him in the past. You have been critical of him in the past. However, this feels like he has a strong base now in which to try and secure the future of the monarchy.
Well, I wish that was true, and I wish him well. I hope it is true. But my feeling is, my book about him was called The Rebel Prince. The new edition we call The Rebel King, the making of the monarchy, of the monarch. The problem is, after 50 years of being a rebel and controversial, I don't think he can change. I think he'll try. But I think the real problem is he won't make speeches which stir controversy, but in private he can't resist giving his opinion. And unfortunately I fear that somehow those opinions will leak out, and that'll cause damage, because he does have very passionate opinions on a range of subjects. And however much his speechwriters and he have presented this way, I understand my constitutional position, it is after all been written over the previous years. So the test will come in about 2 or 3 months, when we've forgotten this terrible tragedy this week and he's back to normal, whether he can really control himself.
Well, we already know, for example, don't we, because of the briefing in June to the Times newspaper, that he is opposed to the government's Rwanda scheme.
Exactly.
Something that Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, has said that she will be continuing with. So already you could see that being a potential tension at one of his early audiences with his new Prime Minister.
Exactly. And that is the problem. King Charles isn't going to be any different to Prince Charles. He has such passionate opinions, all these sorts of things, and he does have 2 particular traits. He wants to make his mark in history. He wants to be remembered as King Charles III. In 100 years' time, school children will say that was the great reign of Charles. The second thing is, he does believe in the divine authority of kings. He does believe that he has a special understanding. There's an amazing quote he gave in 2004. I sometimes think that the whole world is on my shoulders and I've got to solve all the problems. He really does have this self-indulgence, and that of course is a danger, and I don't think that he's going to have anyone in his court which warns him to be quiet. So that's my fear. I hope I'm wrong.
Do stand by. We're going to speak to you later, Tom Bower, live from Buckingham Palace. But let's get the latest now from Edinburgh, where our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, has been watching the momentous events there. Darren?
Yeah, good evening, Dan. As you say, momentous day here in the Scottish capital, and tonight thousands of people are pouring in and out of St Giles Cathedral behind me, paying their respects as they walk by Her Majesty's coffin, which will remain in that cathedral overnight, in fact until late afternoon tomorrow. The queue at the moment, Dan, is at least a mile long, with hundreds, thousands joining every hour. And we had that really powerful image earlier on tonight of the Queen's 4 children standing guard next to the coffin inside the cathedral. His Royal Highness, the King, we also had, His Majesty I should say, sorry, the King, we also had the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex and the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, standing guard next to not just Her Majesty's coffin, but their mother. And you look at those images and you think how powerful that is, that tonight that they are standing or had stood guard next to that coffin. And I think for the people of Edinburgh today, it's been a really, really important moment for them. This has been their chance, the people of Scotland, to remember, but also to celebrate the life of Her Majesty the Queen. And that is why we saw the Royal Mile, where I am now, this medieval street, jam-packed with people, standing in silence as that hearse moved up this really, really important moment in British history. Tomorrow, though, the coffin will travel back with Princess Anne in a plane journey back to London, back to Westminster Hall, where she will lie in state, and the British public will get another chance to pay homage to the former monarch, to a former head of state, to Queen Elizabeth II.
Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, live in Edinburgh. Thank you, Darren, and incredible work today I've been watching. And as Darren mentioned, all the eyes of the world were once again on Scotland today, as the late Her Majesty the Queen's coffin travelled from the Palace of Holyrood House along Edinburgh's Royal Mile before being carried into St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving. As part of the ceremony, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was asked to give a reading from the Old Testament.
For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up.
Many have noted the symbolic significance of the Queen's life ending in Scotland, and as we saw her coffin draped today in the Lion Rampant, the Royal Banner of Scotland, it was a welcome reminder of how the monarchy embodies the joint power of the Union. Nevertheless, as early as Queen Elizabeth II's death day, the BBC's North America editor Sarah Smith suggested that Her Majesty's passing could strengthen the cause for Scottish independence. Look.
It's without doubt that the Queen was part of the glue that held the nations of the United Kingdom together. But undoubtedly people who will be unsettled by the passing of the Queen will be wondering what kind of political impact it's going to have as we ask ourselves questions about what kind of United Kingdom we are now and whether in fact we should remain united.
Neil Oliver joins me now. And Neil, while the doomsters continue to report on breaking up our nation, is it not true that these past few days have actually underlined just how cherished Scotland is in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, hi Dan. It's at the very least, I think it's just very interesting the way in which the spontaneous response that we're definitely seeing in Scotland. I think it shows that there are four nations in the United Kingdom, but so many people, north, south, east, and west, evidently feel the same way as one another in the face of the Queen's death. That is just interesting. It underlines what I've always felt, that a majority of people all over the country are responding to what has happened in that spirit of something shared. The High Street in Edinburgh, the Royal Mile, it's 10 deep, or it was 10 deep earlier. You're seeing the queues. It's a visible symbol of something important, and symbols do matter. The response that you see in Scotland, it's not been planned, it's not choreographed or forced in any way. It's an instinctive reaction by people sharing a response to an event of national and also global significance. And you saw the reporter there suggesting that Her late Majesty was the only glue holding the Union together. And time will tell. But my own reaction is that I think there's much more besides. I think there's 300 years of shared history that come together as the glue. And others have said, and they're right, that it's not a time for politics, and that's quite correct. But I think what we're seeing in Scotland is it's not politics. It's people reacting in a human way, without any prompting, to the loss of someone to whom so many people feel and felt a connection, and whose death they want to mark. And I think that, in and of itself, is unifying. I think it's demonstrable that you're going to see that from the top of Scotland to the far south of England, and into the west in Northern Ireland and into the east. It's going to be marked in the same way. And I, as someone who's just interested in history and interested in the way in which and the whys and the wherefores of the ways in which people react to events, I find it fascinating that that people, as you're seeing now in Scotland, are reflecting something that shows a common bond.
Yeah, exactly. And Neil, we're obviously not really talking too much about politics this week, but it's been fascinating, hasn't it, to see the Scottish nationalists, Sturgeon in particular, Ian Blackford, have to deal with this?
Well, yes. I think it's symbols matter. I heard myself saying that last night when I was down in the studio in London, and I feel it very strongly just now. Symbols matter, and the Queen has died in Scotland, and her first procession through a part of the realm has been through Scotland, from Balmoral to Aberdeen, through some of the principal parts of Scotland, and then down to Edinburgh. And it does matter, because it absolutely, and no matter what impression the Scottish National Party might want, it underlines the fact that the monarchy, Her Majesty the Queen, the royal family have deep historical connections to Scotland. The wellspring, in many respects, of that monarchy, of that royal line, comes out of Scotland. That is undeniable. That is just historical fact, and the way in which events are unfolding, it just underlines and underscores that. And it will, without anyone necessarily wanting or wishing it to have happened, the sequence of events simply underlines the fact that Scotland and the realm of the United Kingdom and the monarchy and the royal family, they are woven together in a very complicated Gordian knot that reaches back hundreds and the better part of 1,000 years. It's powerful, potent stuff, and the way that these events have unfolded, just the way that they have unfolded, that will be reminding people of something that's deeper than politics, much deeper than politics, and that is history. That which people are being reminded of is history, and no matter what any political party or whatever, what some here today, gone tomorrow political movement might want to make of it, the deep ties of history matter. And we're seeing that play out. And forever after, people will remember, and it will matter deeply and profoundly to a lot of people north of the border, that Her Majesty's last journey was here. It began in Scotland, and that she will have spent that last night here in Scotland. That matters. People remember, and sometimes it's those symbolic moments. It's those transient moments that register and lodge themselves in people's memories, and they can affect future events.
Neil Oliver, only you could put it that way, but it was beautiful. And I hope Sarah Smith and the BBC were listening, because, as Neil points out, things are not so simple. Yes, the Queen's loss is a blow, but in fact, the events of the past few days may actually end up strengthening the Union. The brilliant Neil Oliver, I loved your coverage over the weekend. Thank you so much, Neil.
Thank you, Dan.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel. It's 10 p.m. I'm Dan Wootton, live from Buckingham Palace, which will become the centre of the nation's grief, with mourners expected to fill London and queue for 20 hours to see Her late Majesty the Queen's coffin and pay their respects. And tonight, a grief-stricken King Charles stood vigil over his mother's coffin as it lies in state at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. In a sign of Elizabeth the Great's far-reaching popularity, Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving, and with even relentless nationalist Nicola Sturgeon obliged to play a key role, will today's historic scenes in Scotland actually strengthen the Union? My esteemed panel of political commentators return to give their view next. Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and former MEP and campaigner Belinda de Lucy. Then at 10:30, we're asking whether William and Harry are on a true path to reconciliation, as it's revealed their surprise Windsor walkabout could be followed by another poignant reunion, walking side by side behind their grandmother's coffin. As well-known royalist Thomas Markle continues to recover from his stroke. His children, Samantha and Thomas Jr., have asked for the opportunity to share the family's grief. So the Markle family will pay tribute to Queen Elizabeth II live here at 10:20. Plus, StarDailyMail.com columnist Meghan McCain explains why the heartless left-wing media disrespecting Britain as it mourns its greatest ever monarch do not represent the views of truly patriotic Americans. She joins me live from Washington, D.C. at 10:45. So plenty more expert reaction and analysis still to come as we continue to pay tribute to our late Queen Elizabeth II. But first, I'm joined live at Buckingham Palace by acclaimed royal biographer Tom Bower. So Tom, so much has happened today, but obviously tomorrow is going to be another hugely historic day because the Queen will return, or the late Queen Elizabeth II will return to London. What are you expecting?
Well, huge crowds, huge emotion, whatever's happened in Edinburgh even more. I think that there's going to be a feeling of finality, but on the other hand, a willingness to actually acclaim her amazing reign. I think there'll be pledges of loyalty to King Charles, who has performed brilliantly over the last few days. I think there'll be fears about what Harry and Meghan intend. There'll be hopes that somehow the royal courtiers will solve the problem of Andrew and not allow some ghastly spectacle when they have the vigil in Westminster Abbey. So there's a lot of uncertainty still, plus the certainty that it's going to be a very, very depressing, very mournful, very grief-stricken few days still.
So there's a lot at stake, and it's not going to be simple, but I think the one thing that the royal family don't have any need to worry about is the reaction from the public. I mean, there's talk, Tom, that London might actually end up being officially quote-unquote full for the last time.
Absolutely.
For the first time, sorry.
First time, yeah. No, and what's interesting is I've been looking at The Guardian, that paper that most people have forgotten, and they're really finding it hard
You poor thing.
to be critical. I mean, it's
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
They're finding it very, very hard to explain to their besotted readers. Even Jeremy Corbyn, after all, turned up for the Privy Council, parliamentary speech this morning. I mean, they're caught up in it as well, much of their chagrin. And they're constantly trying to say, well, it's not really Britain, what we're watching now, but it is Britain. That's the fantastic thing.
So it's not a given that this is going to be some sort of massive boost to the Republican movement?
Oh, I think on the contrary. What's always terrific is every time there's a royal event, either a sad one like this or the Jubilee, that it puts the Republicans in the minority. I mean, apparently only 14% support a republic. And I think even young people, I mean, so many young people on the streets coming out to mourn and to watch the spectacle and the rest of it. I think there's developing real roots. And Charles is very good for the young. I mean, he really has done a lot. The Prince's Trust has helped hundreds of thousands of young people. And William and Kate are the face of the modern monarchy. And they're gathering many, many supporters. They're doing a terrific job. So I have great hopes for the monarchy. And I think that's what the Queen's greatest legacy is. She has bequeathed a strong constitution, a strong monarchy, children and grandchildren who are working hard and accepted. And, you know, that's going to, when even the blessed Boris Johnson says she should be called Elizabeth the Great, I think he's got a point there.
I'm all for that. I'm all for that. Tom Bower, it's been such a pleasure tonight. Thank you so much, Tom. We're here until 11, of course, with all the latest coverage as the nation continues to mourn our greatest ever monarch. But to wrap up the day's events, the news now at 10 with Tamsin Roberts.
Dan, thank you. Good evening from the GB newsroom. King Charles and his siblings have held a vigil at the Queen's coffin at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. The King, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex stood at the four sides of their mother's coffin. Members of the public are filing past Her Majesty tonight to pay their respects. The Queen will lie in rest at St Giles Cathedral overnight before being flown to London tomorrow, where she will rest at Buckingham Palace. Earlier, the King visited the Scottish Parliament, where he and the Queen Consort received a motion of condolence. After 2 minutes' silence, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon reflected on the Queen's life and her close bond with Scotland. The King responded by promising to follow his mother's example.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
King Charles also led a procession earlier today following the Queen's coffin along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. Joined by his siblings, they walked from Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, where a remembrance service was held. During the service, Elder of the Church of Scotland, Morag Milne, thanked God for the Queen's long life.
With all our hearts, we thank you for the long life, the shining example, the steadfast commitment to duty, the strong faith, and the good humour of our wise and great Queen.
And this morning in London, King Charles attended Westminster Hall, where both Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion.
In reply, the King said he was deeply grateful for their addresses and described Parliament as a living and breathing instrument of democracy. In his first statement since the Queen's death, the Duke of Sussex said he will honour his father, King Charles. In an emotional tribute to his grandmother, Prince Harry said, "You are sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over." He reflected on his first meetings with the Queen, including the moment she met his wife and when she hugged her beloved great-grandchildren. This is GB News. Let's get back to Dan Wootton now at Buckingham Palace.
My Superstar panel back with me in a moment, but first, let's take a first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. Now, the Daily Express leads with a touching image of King Charles III in front of the Queen's coffin, lost in grief for darling Mama. The photo was taken at the vigil at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh earlier this evening. The Metro's front page simply reads The King's Vigil, with a sombre picture of King Charles in front of the coffin earlier tonight. The Independent shows the royal siblings united in grief as they attend that vigil for their mother. The paper leads, though, with Ukraine's troops winning back towns from Russia in the northeast of the country. The Eye reads Vigil for a Mother, with that historic photo of Charles at the vigil of the Princess and Princess Anne. The Times leads with another incredible wraparound front page, actually, in a quote from King Charles at Westminster Hall today. "As I stand before you, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us." The Daily Telegraph leads with an image of Charles in the cathedral and the headline Guard of Honour. The paper writes that there were no tears and no wails, just the sound of footsteps, then arms clasped and heads bowed. The Guardian carries a photo of King Charles in Edinburgh earlier today, but alternatively, its lead story is on the mounting pressure for Prime Minister Liz Truss to reveal the details of her energy plan as the country emerges from mourning. So it's interesting, Tom Bower earlier was talking about the Guardian, wasn't he, and the fact that so far they had been on board with coverage of the Queen's death. No longer, in the middle of a mourning period, they're already criticising Liz Truss. How predictable. The Daily Star leads with 30-hour queues expected in the UK as many flock to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. The late Her Majesty the Queen. The paper also writes on Prince Harry's tribute to her granny and pays tribute to his... he of course paid tribute to her service and her smile. And silent vigil for a queen and a mother. That's the headline on the Daily Mail, with the King leading the nation in mourning. I'm joined now by my superstar panel. The Star Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda de Lucy. Now, as thousands of grieving Scots watched in near silence as the Queen's coffin made its historic journey up the Royal Mile in Edinburgh today, the Union has never felt stronger. It follows beautiful scenes yesterday where huge crowds lined the route of the cortege as it made its way across the devolved nation, most surprisingly in areas like Dundee, which has been a nationalist stronghold for 30 years. Now, even scheming Nicola Sturgeon has been forced to swallow her rabid nationalism momentarily and admit how important the late monarch was to Scots.
It's obvious then, and on every occasion she graced us with her presence, was the Queen's genuine love of Scotland. Indeed, her first official visit was here in Scotland when she opened the Aberdeen Sailors' Home in October 1944. In the decades since, the Queen has been intrinsic to the story of modern Scotland. Your Majesty, we stand ready to support you as you continue your own life of service and as you build on the extraordinary legacy of your beloved mother, our Queen.
Well, those scenes in Scotland are expected to be replicated on a monumental scale in London, which is predicted to become full as up to 1 million extra folk flock to see the Queen's coffin lying in state. Westminster Hall will be open 24 hours a day from 5 p.m. on Wednesday until 6:30 a.m. next Monday, the day of the funeral. And that's for people to pay their respects. But they may have to wait in a 3-mile-long queue for up to 30 hours. Carol Malone, what do you reckon? Are you going to do it?
Probably not. That's the truth of it.
Be honest.
No, I just said probably not, because I'm talking about the Queen and that's why I have no voice. But it's interesting. You're right. Neil Oliver got it spot on before. Her love of Scotland was entirely genuine. Nicola Sturgeon just said it now, and Charles made a point of talking about it in the Parliament today, and he just said, that she had the greatest admiration for Scotland, and she said that he said she had a deep and abiding bond with the Scottish people, and that is true. It's incredible that in mourning her death, we've become united as a nation again. It's palpable. You can feel it. It is incredible. And one writer, it was Dominic Sambrook, the historian, said today. He said that our shared grief of the Queen has reminded us all of what we have in common. We love our country, we love our history, our tradition, our monarchy, and the monarchy is magical in that way. It has absolutely united us all, and it is interesting to hear Nicola Sturgeon talk. A lot of Scottish nationalists want a republic. That is a million miles away. That's just not going to happen. And that was a testament today by the tens of thousands that lined the route on her way from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and the genuine emotion that we've seen there. The Scottish people adore the Queen, and the feeling was entirely mutual. And although the fact she died at Balmoral was an absolute coincidence, it was incredibly fitting that she died in her beloved Scotland, I think. And I think that will strengthen the Union even more in a bizarre kind of way. That's a part of history for them that will go on forever. That will never be forgotten. She loved being there. She let the Scottish people know time and again that she adored them and the country, and hopefully that will put an end to all this talk about separating us. I feel we're closer than ever.
Yeah, I agree, actually. Belinda de Lucy, do you? And by the way, are you going to brave the 24-hour queues, Belinda?
Yes, I definitely am. I've told my 4 teenagers they're to get up at 2 a.m. and we are going to make our way there in the unsociable hours. I think it might be a nice gesture for Londoners to actually choose more unsociable hours, so it lets the daytime be there for people travelling around the country who can only make day trips. But I want to go and do it more than once. You know, I wrote to the Queen so often when I was a child and waiting for those heavy envelopes to come through the post with a big ER on. I'm going to miss that, and I never got to see or meet the Queen. You know, it's on a lot of people's lists of what to do before they die, meet the Queen, and many of us will never get that opportunity except when we pass her coffin and pay our respects. I just want to be able to walk past with my children and say thank you. Thank you. And I think as long as they make provisions for our elderly, our disabled, to not have to wait that long, then I think it's a fantastic idea. And actually, these headlines aren't very helpful because it's going to put so many people off telling the country it's going to be a 30-hour queue. Well, maybe it's not. I think they'll work out wonderful ways of getting people there to pay their respects.
Sam Dowler, I believe that you actually were one of these people who slept in the streets before the funeral of Princess Diana back in 1997. Are you going to do the same thing for the Queen?
Yes, I did.
Or the late Queen?
I was a sprightly 18 years old, and I mean, I loved Princess Diana. My family loved her very much as well. I remember my mother waking me up that morning in tears, and a friend of mine from work at the time, we decided to hot-foot it down to London, and we did sleep in the street. I wanted to experience it all. I wanted to see the field of flowers, and we woke up in the morning, and yes, and we watched the coffin come past, and our princess as well. So it's a very important moment, and I remember it, you know, to this day, obviously. So I do think I will go. I will go down there. I do agree with Belinda that, you know, that there should be obviously, you know, for the elderly and for the disabled, that they should be able to go to the front, but for the rest of us, I think, you know, queuing up, take some snacks. I'm totally up for it. I think I want to, like, I have family that live down in Devon and Cornwall, and they want me to go. They want me to lay flowers on their behalf. They want me to speak on their behalf, and I would love to do that. I'm hoping somebody like creates some sort of app where they will tell us when, you know, when the hours are particularly low, and we can pop down there. I think it's something that we'll never forget. I think it's this is a powerful moment, and I have to agree with Carol as well that, you know, this, I think everyone is surprised by the outspilling of love in Scotland. I think catharsis brings change. I think Nicola Sturgeon would be a fool to bang her drum about independence anytime soon. But yes, I'll be there down in the queue at some point. Just don't look for me.
Well, I guess it's one of those great equalisers, isn't it? Because unless you're an MP, maybe a member of the House of Lords, I don't think there's any queue jump, Sam. No matter who you are, no matter how much money you have, no matter how famous you are, you line up for the 24 hours, and that is a beautiful equalising moment, I think. Sam Dowler, Carol Malone, Belinda DeLucy do stand by, but look, the mouthpiece of Meghan Markle, that odd little bloke, Omid Scobie, has been popping up all over the place this week, trying to cash in on the royal family, which he loves to disrespect in the name of the Duchess of Woke. But does he actually have any idea what he's talking about? Watch this from the American channel ABC.
Will end up laying at rest at the smallest palace in Edinburgh before it makes its journey on one of the royal trains over to the UK.
So did you catch his slip-ups? If not, have another look.
Before it makes its journey on one of the royal trains over to the UK, over to the UK, over to the UK.
Over to the UK? He's been listening to Nicola Sturgeon too much, hasn't he? And it's not just US TV making mistakes. Jane Secker from Sly News was caught stoking the idea of revolution and encouraging for it seemingly to overthrow the monarchy. I'm not joking, listen.
As Lord Bottomley were talking to him, was referring to this and saying how, you know, some people will say, well, you know, how come we've got a royal family? It's not very democratic. The fact of the matter is, it is democratic, you know, until we have a revolution. It's democratic in the sense that the British public is laissez-faire about changing it.
Well, Jane, I'd say you're wrong. The British people are not laissez-faire about the monarchy. We are, on the whole, proud and actually not afraid to say so. And actually, that's one of the reasons why it's been so lovely hearing from you all week since we've been here with you on Thursday night. More of your feedback now. Ruth, via the email, says, I think Harry and Meghan will have been shocked to the core that despite their best efforts, King Charles and Queen Camilla have been so very warmly welcomed by the British public. Absolutely. Very good point. Very good point from Digby on Twitter. I was born in 77, and growing up, people would say that was a Jubilee year. I have a coin, a tea towel and other bits that my family bought me, but never really thought about what they meant until I grow up. It is hard to swallow that there may never be another monarch like her. Very good point. And please do send me your thoughts and feelings on this sad occasion, both on email to dan@gbnews.uk and via our GB News Twitter account. I've been loving talking to you these past few days. It's really helped me, so thank you so much. Now, despite the Markle family's ongoing disagreement with the Sussexes, their love for our late Queen is overpowering. Meghan's father, Thomas, is a well-known royalist, but as he's recovering from a stroke which has cruelly stolen him of his speech, it's his children who are speaking on his behalf at this deeply emotional time. Samantha and Thomas Markle Jr., who is currently looking after his father, have asked for the opportunity to express their family's grief and address the British public directly. So I'm delighted to say that they join me now from Florida in Sam's case and from Rosarito, Mexico in the case of Thomas Markle Jr. Thomas, tell me, how did you learn of the news of the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and how did you inform your father of the news?
Oh, hello. Thursday morning, I was going through my YouTube answering comments, and they started pouring in, and that's how I was informed, sadly. And then text started rolling in. So it was a very shocking morning because it just didn't feel right anyway. Something was off. And then immediately I picked up the phone and called Dad, and he had already been informed as well. It was a very sad morning.
How did your dad react, Thomas?
Dad was and still is upset and sad about it, as we all are. We feel as though we have, some sort of a connection to the late Queen and the British people, and on behalf of him and myself, our deepest condolences go out to the late Queen and the entire everybody in the UK.
Samantha, it's so nice to speak to you. Unfortunately, not in great circumstances tonight. I'm very sad for Thomas because I know that it was one of his lifelong ambitions to meet the Queen one day. He hoped that would still happen, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And we spoke today, and he was very clear about wishing to extend his reverence, his condolences, and just his heartfelt sorrow for the British royal family and the British people, as we all are. I think it's been a heavy-hearted day for all of us. Here in Florida, we have many, many Britons, and we have, Floridians in general who are royalists, who were raised, who grew up like the rest of the world, adoring Her Royal Majesty, and she's become a part of American fiber as well, everyone's mother, everyone's grandmother. And so I think it's just been very sad for us across the pond as well. So I'm honored to extend my condolences to the British royal family and to you, the British people, for this tragic loss. It's very sad.
Thomas, have you and your father been watching any of the coverage from the UK, and do you intend to watch the funeral next Monday?
Yes, absolutely. I've been catching quite a bit of it on television, and it's just an incredible journey, and it's amazing the respect, and it's just incredible just watching the entire crowds give their respects. So I definitely plan on watching the services as well. Just such a remarkable person. I mean, she was the world's queen, the entire world. I don't think there's a more remarkable, amazing woman on the planet.
Samantha, of course, your sister, Meghan, coincidentally was in the UK when the Queen died. She has made this public walkabout with the new Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Kate. But Thomas Bauer, who I know that you both know and your father knows as well, he was on the show earlier, and he said that Prince Harry does intend to press ahead with the release of his autobiography in November, despite the death of the Queen. Do you think that's appropriate, Sam?
Well, that being said, if those are the plans moving forward, we can only hope that there are favorable and not salacious morsels of information in the book, that it would be a tribute of sorts and honor her memory more than anything. So, you know, we wait, and we can only wonder until then. But very sad. I think that that's still coming out. You know, unless it's good.
I think that's an understatement, Samantha, absolutely, because it's very unlikely to be good from what we hear. Thomas, what did you make of the reunion between Harry and Meghan and Kate and William?
I didn't really give it that much thought because it's not, you know, I don't think, I think it was just irrelevant as far as I was concerned. I don't think it should. And I think it was more of I don't know. It just didn't seem fitting that would be brought into the light during all of this. I didn't think it was relevant, but it could have been done a different way, I believe. But you know, also, you know, I mean, it is family, and family does have to come together in times like this.
Yeah, indeed. And Thomas, how did the news of the Queen's death go down in Mexico?
There was a few local articles in the papers. Other than that, I've just been, you know, we've just been staying close to home and just being low key. Other than what's on the news, but there was a few local articles about it. Not that I can.
Samantha, given that Meghan has now reunited with the Windsor side of the family, of course coming back together with William and Kate, despite all of the acrimony, do you hold out some hope that this might be a bit of a life-changing event for her, one of those moments that makes her think, oh my goodness, I've got to see and speak to my father before he dies?
Well, I would hope that that the events that occurred with my father himself would have been causal in that epiphany. And so, you know, I'm not keeping my fingers crossed or holding my breath on the grounds that so much has transpired that's been serious. But with regards to this event and the memorial and the passing of Her Majesty, you know, I just have to say a little bit off topic. There was so much play in the media about the reunion of the Fab Four as the focus, which felt really inappropriate on the grounds that, firstly, my brother, you know, and the world are right. It should be about Her Royal Majesty and remembrance of her. But also, I think there's been so much water under the bridge. I don't think at issue is whether or not everyone should just let bygones be bygones and hope for the Fab Four and want the fairy tale solidified again. I think the burden, the onus really is on those who have caused the pain and those who have engaged in mudslinging to make amends and to be the ones to be accountable, apologize, and extend the olive branch. You know, I think that can't go to the wayside. So I'm hopeful for that, but that's, you know, not up to any of us. And we can only wonder whether or not, you know, that's going to happen. This has been tragic, and sometimes it takes a tragedy to open the eyes of some. And by God, whatever it takes, as long as it happens, you know, that life is short. So if it happens, then, you know, then we're all better, we're all blessed, and perhaps we've all learned something then from Her Royal Majesty.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There are so many things we can learn from the Queen. Sam, I just wanted to talk to you because I know you're in Florida. A lot of the sort of liberal left-wing American media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, has been very disrespectful over the past few days of Britain, of our monarchy, of the Queen, of William and Kate as well, the new Prince and Princess of Wales. And one CNN report, they were simply dismissed as, oh, those other royals, because they were so focused on Harry and Meghan. I spoke to Rudy Giuliani on the show last night, though, and he said that very small elite section of the American media does not represent the wider feelings of the American public, who are actually very affectionate towards the Queen, very pro the monarchy. Do you agree with that sentiment, Sam?
I do, and I agree with that on the grounds that the radical left have spun a narrative that is very emotional and fragmented without looking at full facts on the table, such as, you know, the charitable contributions and activities of the British royal family, particularly Her Royal Majesty, going back to, you know, being integral and involved in more than 600 charities worldwide, beginning in 1949, and to the tune of billions of dollars. And so when some of these lefties speak about racism or disconnectedness, they are really not looking at the facts, at the big picture. And I think, you know, before they engage in emotional mudslinging, they should really look into what she was all about as an icon, as a contributor to this world that we live in and to the betterment of it. The world is a bit more dismal without her unless we adhere to some of the values that she left us with. And I think the left would be wise to, you know, apply some of those values in their lives. It only can bring good. So, yeah.
Point. Thomas, finally to you. Obviously, we're following very closely the progress of your dad. How is he doing? We're still determined, of course, that he'll make that visit one day to London.
Yeah, I did the other day, actually. Dad plans on definitely making the trip. He's doing very well, making more progress all the time, which is great. So we definitely do want to make that trip and get over, and definitely looking forward to it. We also wanted to say deepest love and sympathy to Charles, and compassion for Charles and the entire royal family as well.
Absolutely. Well, look, really beautiful stuff. Thank you so much to Samantha and Thomas Markle Jr. paying tribute to Queen Elizabeth II. So we're live at Buckingham Palace tonight. I want to bring in now our London reporter Alice Porter, who has been monitoring the growing crowds of mourners around the country and especially here at the epicentre, Buckingham Palace. Alice, of course, tomorrow is going to be the big day, isn't it, or one of many to come in the capital?
Absolutely. I mean, these crowds that we've been seeing here are just going to be growing and growing. I mean, a couple of hours ago, I went and had a look at some of the floral tributes, and I have to say, the sea of flowers is just absolutely stunning. And I think what's so charming is seeing all these children who've got involved. There was one child who left a little hobby horse, which I just thought was a lovely ode to the Queen. So yeah, lots going on here. Crowds still arriving, but my goodness me, those are going to increase even further tomorrow because the Queen's coffin is being flown from Edinburgh to RAF Northolt, and it will be making its way here, where it will be met by King Charles, who's having an incredibly busy day tomorrow. He's going from Edinburgh to Belfast, having a number of visits there, and then he's going to be coming here to meet the coffin, where it will stay for the night at Buckingham Palace before an enormous sort of cortege will be going through to Westminster Hall on Wednesday. And I think we're going to see a change in tone, you know, like what we've seen with the flowers, the tributes. I was at Windsor Castle yesterday. It was very jovial. I think families kind of coming together. But I think we're going to see on Wednesday a real change in tone, where for people in England, there's suddenly their Queen is coming back, and the Queen is going to be in a coffin. And I think that is going to be very significant and a real change in tone for the British public.
And Alice, is London prepared for this? I mean, is it going to be able to cope with this influx of crowds? Discussion that the queues may actually stretch for 24 hours.
Well, I have to say, I was quite surprised. People are already queuing on Lambeth Bridge right now. I mean, that's 48 hours ahead of when we're expecting the coffin to be moving there. So it's really quite extraordinary. I mean, I thought it was just quite a sweet sort of anecdote that actually one of the people who's camped out at the moment is a former butler of the Queen, which I think really just shows the kind of how wide-ranging the support is for the royal family, for the monarchy. And I think that's been such a striking aspect that we've noticed with all the tributes that have been made. This is something that pulls people together of all ages and generations. But my goodness me, will it be a challenge for the capital? Absolutely. All the hotel chains are saying that they're going to be fully booked. There's warnings about the trains and people taking the transport. But I think in some ways, look, this is history. How often does something like this happen? Yes, London gets packed out. We saw this with the Olympics, but this is going to be something even more extraordinary for people in Britain. So I think, yes, we're going to see increased security. Yes, we're going to see queues on the streets going back. But I'm like, when have we seen something like this? People queuing to see a coffin. I mean, it is something from the history textbooks, and we're here witnessing it. It's wonderful.
Indeed. Alice Porter, our London reporter. I'm sure it's going to be a very busy day for you tomorrow. Alice, thank you so much. But let's take a look now at tomorrow's newspaper front pages, and The Sun leads with a sombre Prince King Charles at the vigil in Scotland. Elsewhere, the paper covers Prince Harry not being able to wear military uniform at the Queen's funeral. The Daily Express leads with a touching image of King Charles III in front of the Queen's coffin, lost in grief for darling Mama. The photo was taken at that vigil at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh earlier this evening. The Metro's front page simply reads The King's Vigil, with a sombre picture of King Charles in front of the coffin earlier tonight. The Independent shows the royal siblings united in grief as they attend that vigil for their mother. The paper also leads with Ukraine's troops winning back towns from Russia in the northeast of the country, which is of course the other really big international story at the moment. The Eye headline, Vigil for a Mother, with that historic photo of Charles. The Times has a wraparound front page again with a quote from King Charles III from Westminster Hall today. As I stand before you, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us. And the Daily Telegraph also leads with an image of Charles in the cathedral and the headline, Guard of Honour. The paper writes, there were no tears and no wails, just the sound of footsteps, then arms clasped and heads bowed. The Guardian carries a photo of King Charles in Edinburgh earlier today, but it's decided to break the national mourning period and run with a lead story about the mounting pressure for Prime Minister Liz Truss to reveal the details of her energy plan as the country emerges from mourning. Let me just say, if Liz Truss was speaking about the energy plan at the moment, can you imagine the criticism she would receive? The Daily Star leads with 30-hour queues expected in the UK as many flock to pay their respects to Her Majesty the Queen. The paper also writes on Prince Harry's tribute to his granny and her service and smile. And the Daily Mail has a headline, Silent Vigil for a Queen and a Mother. Now, my superstar panel, back with me, the Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, the journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, and the political commentator Belinda de Lucy. The sight of William and Harry reunited alongside their wives during Saturday's surprise walkabout in Windsor was a heartening throwback to the affectionate and supportive times of old. The two brothers, whose once inseparable bond had been forged by the tragic loss of their mother, were again united by grief as they mourn their grandmother. And there could be a second, even more poignant reunion at her Majesty the Queen's funeral next Monday, with organisers reportedly hoping for William and Harry to walk side by side behind her coffin. Now, you'll remember their cousin Peter Phillips actually separated them during Prince Philip's funeral procession in April last year during the height of their feud. But was the reunion on the Long Walk the beginning of a path to reconciliation, or just a royal truce as the family put on a united front during this time of national mourning? Well, the Daily Mail's editor-at-large Richard Kay is reluctant to see it as anything but a temporary period of peace. He believes a lot depends on how the Sussexes behave in the coming days. And Richard writes, perhaps we should see Saturday's exercise among the mourners at the gates to Windsor Castle as a first step, and that both William and Harry will be able to reflect that they and the royal family are better and stronger together than they are apart. At the moment, the closest analogy to the events of the past few days is that of soldiers on the Western Front during the First World War, when they held their own ceasefire with the enemy on Christmas Day in order to play football. Those soldiers famously returned to their trenches and carried on hostilities. So is this a real step towards William and Harry resolving their feud, or are they just temporarily putting their differences aside out of respect to their grandmother, Carol Malone?
I don't think this is in any way, shape or form the first step to reconciliation. I mean, how can they ever be reconciled when trashing and disrespecting the royal family is now Harry and Meghan's business? It's how they earn a living. How could they possibly be invited back into the royal fold? How could they possibly come into the royal fold when they can't be trusted not to keep the secrets they will hear behind the royal walls, when they can't be trusted not to blab? You know, last year Harry had tea with the Queen for literally an hour, and within minutes of him coming out of that tea, he started to talk about it to an American TV network. You know, how can they ever have a reconciliation? They're never going to be reconciled as long as they make their living in this way. And I'm pretty sure that Harry will walk behind the Queen's coffin at the funeral with William. But that doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination this is a reconciliation. You know, you can see they're very uncomfortable in each other's company. I was looking at them when they were doing that walkabout. Not once did Kate look at Meghan. And there was a time when Meghan looked across at her. Kate just wasn't having it. I think there's a lot of anger on her side, quite rightly, because Kate was very badly trashed. And William is angry with his brother because he trashed not only the family, called them racist, he trashed his wife. So I just don't see how they can have a reconciliation while Harry and Meghan are living in America, while they have contracts with multi-million-pound companies to trash the royal family. It's never going to happen. Tom Bauer had it right. He said, you know, here we have two very insignificant people trying to ruin the royal family. And I fear, you know, and the other thing that Tom Bauer revealed tonight was that Harry is, despite everything that's happened, despite all that talk today about his respect for the Queen, despite all of that, it is him who was pressing ahead with the publication of this book in November. I mean, it's shocking and it's shameful, and he should be ashamed of himself, actually.
Sam Dowler?
Well, I mean, so many of us have siblings, and so many of us have had arguments with our siblings. And I truly believe that it was quite possible on her deathbed that the Queen might have said that one of her dying wishes was that they be reconciled. And within 24 hours, they were out in public with a sign of togetherness. And
This is nonsense. This has nothing to do with the Queen. The Queen didn't say that. They got together because I don't care if you're speaking. William sent a text to him to ask him to go.
We don't know any of that.
Well, yes, we do.
No, we don't know any of that.
It's been in the papers today. Read the papers.
Yeah, but it's not set in stone, and we also don't know what. And what you might agree with what Tom Bauer says. We don't know if that's true either. At the end of the day, it would be nice. And we are a nation of forgiveness, and to forgive one's siblings, to forgive people who have done wrong is a good feeling. Not to hold these grudges forever, because it's very bad for our mental health, etc. So I think maybe if we hope that this could be the beginning of something. And as I said earlier on in the programme, there could be a tempering of the book, there could be a cancellation of the book. We do not know, but I think. You
seem to know better than Tom Bauer, who's written a biography on it. But anyway,
I'm not saying that at all.
Well,
I'm just hoping that in light of the Queen's death, there might be some sort of light at the end of the tunnel.
Belinda de Lucy?
Well, I think it's very British to be polite to those you don't like. I mean, often you'll see, our reserved way of dealing with people that we're not too fond of. But Prince William is the epitome of manners and class with his invitation to Harry. I absolutely think he did it for his grandmother and not for Harry. And I think that was the right thing to do, to be unified in the eyes of the world in grieving for their grandmother. I think that is the right thing to do. However, I don't think there will be any reconciliation. As Carol mentioned, Harry and Meghan sat there and they did accuse Kate in public in front of millions of viewers of making Meghan cry, inciting a wave of hate towards Prince William's wife, Princess Kate. And I don't see why Harry seems to have the right to defend his wife, but William can't defend his. And he should stand with Kate together for the United Kingdom, and Prince Harry and Meghan can stand for themselves back in the USA.
The cynic in me
thank you so much, Belinda de Lucy. Final word, Carol Malone.
I was just going to say, the cynic in me says, what has happened at the Queen's death and what's going to happen afterwards. I think, for Harry and Meghan, this will be a continuation of all their contracts with those companies like Spotify and with Netflix, because there's a lot more for them to say now. And I think that the idea that they will be reconciled, I don't think they care about their family anymore. I think they've made that perfectly clear.
We can hope, though, can't we?
Yeah, I'm an optimist a bit with Sam. Let's hope.
I'm so not.
Let's hope they apologise. Harry and Meghan, that is.
They won't, not in a million years.
Carol
They
Malone,
don't think they've got anything to apologise for.
Belinda de Lucy. Thank you so much, all. Stand by now. As we have seen over the past few days, thousands of Scots have lined the streets to pay their respects to the late Her Majesty the Queen. However, unfortunately, not all of them mourned the loss of our greatest sovereign. Did you hear this woman? Jackie Pickett. So she runs Jackie's Fish and Chip Shop in Muir of Ord in the Highlands. I'm certainly not going to be going there, let me tell you, because she posted a video of herself on the shop's Facebook page. For obvious reasons, it didn't go down well. Look.
Woohoo! Fantastic! Would you do that again? Will it work? And I'll just record it. London Bridge has fallen! Next step, ladies and gents, next step.
Now, that is the nasty side of Scottish nationalism right there. Not unsurprisingly, she received a huge amount of backlash as a crowd of 150 enraged residents descended on the shop to hurl eggs and also, and I don't approve of this, smash windows. Despite all hard-left liberals trying to paint the Queen as some sort of colonising relic of the British Empire, by the way, when you speak to people on the ground, it's usually actually totally different, including this Aboriginal elder who broke down in Australia. I really wanted to show you this because I thought it was a beautiful moment where he recalled the late Queen's kindness.
It's a funny thing to feel a bit emotional about it because she's so welcoming. And she thanked us for coming. And I think for the first, excuse me, I think for the first time in our lives, we were treated properly as she's treated us as human beings.
What a moving story. So do not let anyone tell you that our late Queen Elizabeth the Great was a callous, imperialist racist. In fact, she did more to foster race relations across the globe and supported minorities throughout her realms. Thank you so much to my superstar panel tonight, Carol Malone, Sam Dowler and Belinda DeLucy. See you soon. Now, as we discussed earlier in the show, much of the left-wing media coverage from the US hasn't been particularly respectful this week. Look.
See Harry get out first, then you saw Meghan, and then the other two royals as well.
Andrew, are you really denying what I just said about British colonialism? Are you really doing that, Andrew? Are you really doing that?
We abolished slavery.
Andrew, this is not a propaganda show. Andrew, I need you to stop. I need you to stop for a second. I need you to stop for a second. Are you really taking issue with the horrors of colonialism, Andrew?
I'm certainly taking issue with your remarks about slavery, which we abolished 32 years before you did, and we didn't have to kill 600,000 people in a civil war over it.
The wealth of this empire was derived on the back of the people of their empire.
On display in the palace.
Right, on display everywhere, and in the crown and everywhere. So what we're saying is that there are this answered who want to see their monarch finally talk about what it means and what, you know, potentially the idea of reparations, definitely justice, right? Justice.
But my next guest, Meghan McCain, daughter of the late and much-loved Republican presidential candidate John McCain and also star DailyMail.com columnist, says the American people had enormous love and respect for our late Queen. In a brilliant column, she has written, what makes her past seem so forceful to Americans is the real connection she made between our nations. She nurtured and maintained our special relationship because she knew instinctively that despite our history of conflict, the United States has no more trusted ally than the United Kingdom. And it's an absolute pleasure to say Meghan joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Meghan, I was so glad that I read your column because everything that we're seeing, right, from MSNBC and CNN and the Washington Post and the New York Times seems to want to paint the Queen as some sort of representation of all of the wrongs of the British Empire.
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd, and I think it's very reductive commentary, especially during this time of grief before she has been buried. The Queen is a beloved figure. Americans, average Americans, I don't think completely comprehend the monarchy, but there is an understanding of Queen Elizabeth's vital role in the United States, her vital role keeping freedom and liberty alive in the West. The UK is America's greatest ally. We have fought together in wars. My brother Jimmy fought alongside British soldiers in Afghanistan. It is a long, long history. The Queen Elizabeth met with 14 sitting presidents, including a story I was reminded of, my personal favorite now, meeting with President Ronald Reagan, horseback riding and eating tacos and enchiladas with him, and really fostering a personal relationship. I think she understood the value between our two countries. And I have been very surprised at the deep outpouring of grief and sadness at the Queen's passing. My own mother-in-law came over to my house right after it happened and was almost despondent over it. And I think she's just a figure of steadiness in a chaotic world, of, a person who really has kept calm and peace. And during these times of extremism and unrest, she was a figure we could all look to and a figure of stability that the United States could count on. So people may want to have what I find reductive and disgusting conversations about things that happened well before she became queen. But I think that the tone, at least in my country, from average Americans is one of deep respect and grief for your country right now. This is truly the ending of an era globally. And I think as someone who I consider myself a feminist, she is arguably no greater feminist icon, a woman who was a global leader for over 70 years, who did everything a man can do and better, who did it with class, who did it quietly, who never complained, who never made her gender an excuse for why bad things had happened to her through the chaos going on in the world and also in her family and her personal life. And she is someone that will be remembered for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'm just very sorry about her passing. It has been I think it's a very dark time for a lot of people, a lot of uncertainty. And I certainly hope that now King Charles and Queen Camilla continue their relationship with the United States and come and visit, our president, come and visit our incredible country. I understand that Queen Elizabeth also loved to go to the Kentucky Derby to visit horses. She had been to California. She'd been around the West. In my home state of Arizona, they are very proud that there is a painting hanging in a local museum that was present at her coronation. There is a great source of pride and admiration for Queen Elizabeth. And I think the entire family, aside from two people you already know.
I mean, I think the history with the US presidents is just fascinating, isn't it, Meghan? I mean, this was a woman who hosted JFK and Jackie at Buckingham Palace, and then hosted Donald Trump and Melania at Buckingham Palace. And in fact, she met every single US president aside from LBJ in terms of her time as monarch.
Yes, and there were two moments which the First Lady, Michelle Obama, broke protocol and President Trump broke protocol. Michelle Obama infamously hugged her, which is something that is obviously against royal protocol, and she handled it with a lot of grace and humor, and did the same thing with President Trump, who I believed walked in front of her when, it went against social decorum and protocol. So again, I think just a class act, and a woman who really understood the deep importance of our allyship between America and the United Kingdom. It will maintain a very, very important and significant relationship, the most important in our country. It's the first country we can rely on. For me personally, just looking back at my memories of Queen Elizabeth, the time that I've been, I think, most touched was when she had the Star Spangled Banner played in front of Buckingham Palace after 9/11, which was also, something that had been unusual and unique, and the only time it had happened, as a sign of our allyship, a sign of her, deep love for the United States of America. And I wish people who are criticizing, which again, I really want to emphasize, this is the woke academia in the country. This really isn't a great representation of average Americans and the American public, but she's a very beloved figure, and in a lot of different ways. And I really, really hope that King Charles understands that this allyship is something that is extremely important to my country and should continue on in the same kind of fashion that she held for so long.
No, such a good point. Such a good point. Absolutely. And it has been so lovely to hear, Meghan, that ordinary American folk are sharing in our grief. What's interesting, Meghan, just a final word actually, do you know what's so interesting about the American news channels? Apparently they're desperate to keep on covering this story because, of course, the ratings have doubled apparently for CNN since the Queen's death, but they just have to find a way to do it, I guess, in their woke way, which we expect, don't we? That's how the media works. But look, thank you for your column. That is the Star DailyMail.com columnist Meghan McCain. Absolutely lovely to speak to you, Meghan. And it's been such a pleasure to have your company live here at Buckingham Palace. Thank you, of course, to all of my guests and all of you at home for watching. I'd love to hear from you. Please share your memories of the Queen at GBNews on Twitter. My email address is dan@gbnews.uk. And you can follow the Dan Wootton Club on Twitter. I come and join after the show, and you can find that by looking to find me on Twitter at Dan Wootton. Now, we'll be back live here tomorrow night from 9 p.m. and 11 p.m, but it is my good friend Mark Dolan who's going to be taking you up to midnight on this poignant day for the country. But before all of that, the news with Tamsin Roberts. Good night.
Good evening from the GB newsroom. The Queen's coffin is lying in rest at St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh as mourners continue to file past to pay their respects tonight. Earlier this evening, King Charles and his siblings held a vigil, standing at the four sides of their mother's coffin. The Queen will rest at the cathedral overnight before being flown to London tomorrow, where she will rest at Buckingham Palace. The King also visited the Scottish Parliament this evening, where he and the Queen Consort received a motion of condolence. After 2 minutes' silence, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon reflected on the Queen's life and her close bond with Scotland. The King responded by promising to follow his mother's example.
My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service.
This afternoon, King Charles led a procession following the Queen's coffin along the Royal Mile in Edinburgh. Joined by his siblings, they walked from Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral, where a remembrance service was held. During the service, Elder of the Church of Scotland, Morag Milne, thanked God for the Queen's long life.
With all our hearts, we thank you for the long life, the shining example, the steadfast commitment to duty, the strong faith, and the good humour of our wise and great Queen.
The King's busy day started in London at Westminster Hall, where both Houses of Parliament expressed their condolences.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion.
In reply, King Charles said he was deeply grateful for their addresses and described Parliament as a living and breathing instrument of democracy. In his first statement since the Queen's death, the Duke of Sussex said he will honour his father, King Charles. In an emotional tribute to his grandmother, Prince Harry said, "You are sorely missed, not just by us, but by the world over." He reflected on his first meetings with the Queen, including the moment she met his wife and when she hugged her beloved great-grandchildren.